Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Reason and common sense, well, that'll never get you anywhere, Leith.
G'day, Phil. How are you?
Good, mate. I'm really well. So the Albanese government rejecting the East Coast gas reservation.
Yeah, unfortunately, it looks like it. So this has been an ongoing saga, which I've been talking about on 2GB and 4BC for months and months and months. So just to give a quick primer on this, in the early 2010s, the Rudd-Gillard Labor government made the fateful decision to approve LNG exports. So that's liquefied natural gas exports out of Gladstone in Queensland,
right?
Without any requirement that these gas producers need to supply the domestic market first.
Right.
So this stupid policy, this made literally East Coast Australia the only gas exporting jurisdiction in the world, so only place in the world that exports gas to the rest of the world, not to have a domestic reservation policy. So not to have a policy that says you must supply Australians first, or East Coast first, before you export.
Yep.
Or you must set aside a certain amount to supply the domestic market first before you export it. So they made this decision to approve them without doing that, which is stupid. Now, so basically, when these terminals came in, just over a decade ago, since then, we've doubled the production of gas on the East Coast. So we're literally producing twice as much gas on the East Coast as we did just over a decade ago before these terminals came into effect. So you'd think that if we're producing twice as much gas, we should have plenty of gas, right, for us to use, and prices should come down. Unfortunately, we're now supplying 25% less gas to the domestic market. So effectively, these foreign-owned gas companies have come in here, they're sucking up our gas, they're liquefying it, and they're selling off to Asia, and they're supplying less to the domestic market. And as a result, East Coast gas prices have roughly tripled since these LNG exports came online.
Right.
Now, this is an absolute disaster because when you have high gas prices, obviously, if you're a user of gas, you've got to pay more for it, which isn't a good thing. And it's particularly bad if you're a manufacturer because gas is a key input in blast furnaces and all that sort of thing for manufacturing sector. So if the gas price goes up, they become far less competitive. They can't compete. And it's one of the reasons why we've seen a whole bunch of manufacturers shut down in Australia. So Australia lost its last plastics manufacturer, Quenos, last year. We've lost our last architectural glass maker, Oceanic Glass, this year. BlueScope Steel, we haven't lost them yet, but they've threatened to downsize or leave. Incitec Pivot, which is a fertiliser maker, is downsizing and has shut down a whole bunch of factories. And the common theme amongst this is expensive gas price, expensive energy. And the other reason why this matters, Phil, is because gas is one of the price setters of electricity. So when the gas price goes up, it means the electricity price goes up as well because it's one of the key price setters in the wholesale electricity market. And so this tripling of gas prices has also driven up electricity prices. So it's an absolute disaster for the nation to be, a major exporter of gas. We export roughly 3/4 of our gas on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So nearly 3/4 of our gas is going overseas, mostly to China. We're starving the domestic market. We've sent prices through the roof, which has also set electricity prices up. It's led to higher inflation, cost of living problems, and ultimately it's deindustrialised the economy because we've sent a whole bunch of manufacturers broke. Now, so that's a long-winded introduction, but the coalition during the election had an excellent gas policy. Unfortunately, they obviously lost, but they promised to implement an East Coast reservation policy, which would have imposed export levies on uncontracted gas in the spot market. So that's gas that's not under contract, which is available to sell. They would have effectively forced the gas companies to supply that domestically rather than sending it offshore. And the way they would have done it is they would have imposed an export levy. So if they try to sell that uncontracted gas, they get slugged a tax. Whereas if they sell it domestically, they don't have to pay the tax.
Yeah, right.
And the coalition promised to lower East Coast gas price to below $10 a gigajoule. So currently it's, floats around 12, sometimes goes higher. So it would have reduced, the price by, 20% or whatever it is, just over 20%. Now, the counterfactual to not doing this, to not having East Coast gas reservation, is that we've got shortages on the East Coast of gas. The ACCC and, other bodies have warned that the shortages are getting so dire that soon we're going to start importing gas on the East Coast. So this is the absurdity of it. Despite the fact that we export nearly 3/4 of our gas, we're going to have import terminals down south in New South Wales and Victoria and possibly South Australia down the track, which are going to bring in imported gas from overseas or from Western Australia or whatever. And the problem with that, Phil, is if we start importing gas, the gas price is going to rocket to probably $20 a gigajoule. And the reason for that is we're currently paying basically export parity prices. So that's the export price before you have to freeze it and put it into liquid and then send it on a ship and, the transport costs. If we start importing it, we're going to have to pay the import parity price, which is effectively the export parity price plus the cost of freezing it, which uses a hell of a lot of energy. It's very expensive. And then the cost of transport, and then the cost to put it into an import terminal and then to convert it back into gas, all that sort of thing. So the price will go up to $20 a gigajoule, roughly. And that also means our electricity price is going to rocket. So it's an absolute disaster. The coalition pledged also to invest $1 billion in to build up storage down south, because we've got a north-south pipeline that runs all the way from Queensland down to Victoria. And most of the export gas is in Queensland. Most of the gas is in Queensland. Some's in Victoria, but that's sort of, dwindling. And that pipeline has excess capacity for most of the year, but over the winter months when it's cold and Victorians use it for heating, the pipeline's at capacity. So the coalition wanted to actually expand the pipeline and also build some storage so that you can basically, like your gas barbecue bottle, you fill it up in the off season to use when you want to use it in the months where you need it. And so, it was a great policy. Unfortunately, Labor's resource minister, Madeleine King, dismissed the coalition's policy as, quote, a thought bubble during the election. But last week we got a glimmer of hope because the AFR reported that the Albanese government was considering imposing the reservation policy, which, got people like me excited. But sadly, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese this week has distanced Labor from reservation. So, everyone was thinking, Labor's going to basically copy the coalition's policy. That's what we were thinking last week. But then Albanese came out this week and, basically threw a wet blanket over that notion. And despite praising Western Australia's gas reservation policy, because Western Australia has a reservation policy, unlike the East Coast, they've got a separate gas market. There's no pipeline between it. Western Australians enjoy abundant gas. They've got cheap gas and cheap electricity. Us on the East Coast, we've got shortages, despite the fact we export nearly 3/4 and we pay high prices. So it's two different markets, two totally different outcomes. Albanese praised the Western Australia's reservation policy, said, quote, WA frankly showed good vision going forward when they put the reservation in place. That's a direct quote. But then at the same time, he said that the coalition's reservation plan had been plucked out of a Cocoa Pops packet.
Right.
And said that Labor already has the power to force producers to sell to the domestic market, which, if that's true, why the hell aren't they selling more of it, and why are we paying such high prices? Now, the upshot is that it looks like Labor isn't going to do domestic reservation, which is an absolute shame. And if they don't do it, we're going to start importing gas, and we're going to have shortages, and we're going to pay a hell of a lot higher prices for gas, and we're also going to pay higher electricity. So Labor really needs to get with the program here, fix the policy failure that it did under the Rudd-Gillard government when it failed to set up the reservation scheme at the outset. It needs to right the energy wrongs, and it needs to bring in a domestic reservation policy. Because if we don't do this, we are going to have soaring gas prices, and we're going to have soaring electricity prices because we're going to have to start importing gas, despite the fact that we export nearly 3/4 of it, most of which goes to China. So this is an absolute policy disaster. It's a policy no-brainer. Labor must act, and they must right their energy policy wrongs, which they did under the Rudd-Gillard government, just over, 12 years ago. And the reason why this is so important at the moment is because for our Queensland listeners, they'd be well aware of this. The Queensland state government last week announced that they're going to open up 9 new areas for gas exploration across the state to boost supply, and the government stated that by boosting supply that they'll stimulate new gas investment and lower energy prices. Well, I'll say from the outset, Phil, I support new gas exploration. We certainly should do it.
Yeah.
But it must be accompanied with a reservation scheme that requires a significant portion of that gas to be provided domestically, because otherwise what's the point? And if we don't do that reservation scheme, what's to stop the gas companies from just siphoning the gas overseas and not supplying the domestic market? Because all we have to do is look at the last decade's experience, whereby we've doubled East Coast gas production, but we've supplied the domestic market with 25% less gas, right? So what's to stop them from doing it again unless we have a reservation policy? It's as simple as that. And, if we don't do this, the only upside from having more gas exploration, if they don't supply it domestically, is that Queensland will receive more royalties eventually, which is a good thing. And that'll obviously make the Queensland Treasury happy. But ultimately, what we need is the domestic gas prices on the East Coast to come down, because that will then also lower electricity prices. It'll reduce energy inflation. It'll ease cost of living because we'll all be paying less for our power, so gas and electricity. And ultimately, it'll assist Australia's manufacturing sector, because unless we have cheap energy, our manufacturing sector will not be able to compete. Because energy is a key input to the factor to their factors of production, and we've driven up the cost of energy. And as a result, as I said before, we've seen our last plastics manufacturer close, our last glass manufacturer, one of our major fertiliser makers, Orica hasn't shut, but they're an explosives and fertiliser maker, and they've warned that with these high energy prices that they risk downsizing or closing down and moving overseas to the US. So we really need cheap and abundant energy. And the fact that Australia exports 4 times more gas than we use domestically, when you combine East and West Coast, we should have cheap and abundant gas. Because why are we exporting 4 times more than we use domestically and denying ourselves cheap energy? And the same goes for coal. Yeah. We export roughly 5 times more coal than we use domestically. So why are we trying to starve ourselves of coal and shut down coal-fired generation when we literally sell 5 or 6 times more coal than we use over to places like China and India to burn instead of us? Why don't we just use this energy ourselves, give ourselves cheap and abundant energy, and then we'll have a more diversified economy, because we'll have a manufacturing industry which will be able to compete with the rest of the world because it has cheap energy.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Well, when Albanese's gas plan hits the fan, he'll have to go find his own Cocoa Pops packet, I imagine, mate.
Yeah, I hope so. And mate, I really hope that if we go down this road, that there is a comeuppance. Because, as I said, Labor completely stuffed this up in the early 2010s when it was them that approved these Gladstone LNG terminals, export terminals, without any requirement for domestic reservation. It was absolutely moronic. All I had to do was look across to Western Australia, which did a similar thing in the early 2000s. In about 2004, the Western Australian government set up, LNG export facilities, but they had the foresight to say, you know what, 15% of all gas has to be supplied to Western Australians. And as a result, Western Australians pay far lower gas prices than what we pay on the East Coast. And as a result, they've got far lower electricity prices. And they're absolutely, it's roses over there. Yeah. And America has a has a gas reservation policy. They have incredibly cheap gas. Pretty much every other place in the world which exports gas has reservation, and they have cheap energy for their citizens. But on the East Coast here, we've stuffed it up. We don't have reservation, and as a result, our citizens pay high costs, our industry pays high costs, and we end up suffering.
Where can people go and find this information, mate? Yeah,
so if you want to read about this sort of stuff, go to www.macrobusiness.com.au.